and it's a great pleasure for me to be here this morning. Yes. And to share some elements regarding the question of the sustainability of industry. If I remember well, the title of the session is Future for Manufacturing Industry, and I think each industrial must have in mind what I'm going to present, and which is a real short abstract of the results brought by the last assessment report that you might have noticed has been released in 2022. So just to explain the work that we develop, we have 3 working groups. Each one is dedicated to one subject. So the first one works on the physical aspects of climate change. The second one works on the facts that if we have climate change, then we will have impact, then we need to adapt. So it's focused on adaptation. And the last one, the one in which I was involved, work in a subject which is more optimistic, the way that is trying to develop solutions for mitigation of greenhouse gases emissions. So I have chosen to show you one slide per each working group, which is kind of a shame, because each report has more than several thousand pages of very interesting results. So I encourage you to go further and deeper in the reports. But I think that if at the end of my talk you keep in mind these elements, I would have done a good job. So first of all, the physical basis on climate change have been assessing since the launching of the IPCC group the fact that at the beginning it was not clearly proven. There might be a relationship between human activities and the increase of the temperature at the surface of the globe. And this time the assessment report says clearly that there is a 1% probability which links the human activities to this increase of temperature that has the consequences of new extreme events with highest intensities and highest frequencies. So here, what you see on the graph is the rise in temperature since the industrial era has been launched in the 80s. And what is the level of rising? It's 1.1. And you may have heard also of this target of 1.5 that we need not to overpass. Why? It's not because 1.5 is a nice world, but it's because 1.5 is going to be a world where the impacts of climate change will be catastrophic, but we can manage that. After 1.5, we really don't know what's going to happen, and you have to understand also that each not each degree, but each 0.1 degree makes a very big difference in the consequences. So, having said that, what can we do for adaptation? You also have to keep in mind, so that's the slide for working group 2, that there is an inequity, a terrible inequity in the way people are experiencing climate change, because it's the region that are the less responsible of these greenhouse gases emissions that are the more impacted by it. And this is what is shown here. The places which are already less stable, less more vulnerable, with poorest people that are the more impacted. And so you see the numbers of people that are concerned by these facts. And also, I would like to say that, no, I will say that after. Okay. So the last slides that I'm going to show you are coming from my working group, so I have dedicated more than one slide. Sorry for the others. Because we're talking about the solutions, okay, now that we know that there is a problem, we're trying to reduce these impacts by trying to mitigate these emissions of greenhouse gases. And the first step is to understand in what state we are. So this is what is represented in the figure here, where you see the level of greenhouse gases emission, which are given in gigaton of CO2 equivalent, and which are divided by the nature of greenhouse gases. We have put all the gases in the same graph, but in fact they don't have the same physical properties. So for instance, if you take CO2, it remains in the atmosphere much more longer than CH4. And so, okay, I don't have time to, because I'm looking at the clock, to get into the details, but what I would like to tell you regarding this is the fact that despite all the climate actions that are claimed all over the world, we have counted more than 800 cities that claim that they want to go to neutral carbon in 2050. More than 100 regions, more than 20 countries, a lot of companies that are claiming that they are going to be zero neutral in the next decades. Despite all these claims, the trend is the same than before. It's growing, and you can just say that the slope is slowing. But for instance, for the industrial sector, the slope is slowing from 3.4% to 1.2%, and the growing is continuing. So we have a problem here. And who is responsible of this greenhouse gases emission? I'm showing this graph also because it's the same curve, you understand that, but it's given by region, and we do not take into account a sector which is the international aviation and shipping sector, because it's not affected to any country. And what is interesting is that you see that it's around 2 or 3% of the share of the greenhouse gases emissions. I think we have today many people involved in the IT industry, and I would like to know if you know what is the share of the IT sector, because it's a growing sector in terms of responsibility, and it's between 3 and 7%. It's very hard to assess exactly, so I want you to be aware of that. Okay, so now that we've said where we are, we also assess where we need to go. Where we need to go is the blue curve, And what you see is that there is a huge gap between the implemented policies, which are given in the red curve, and the pledges policies, which are referring to the pledges that the different states give in the negotiation, which is the gray curve. And you might have heard also the message given by the media when there was the release of the Working Group 3 report. They said that we have 3 years to act. It's completely false. We don't have any more seconds to act. We need to act now. What they did not understand was the meaning of the curves that were saying, if you look at the red curve or the gray curve, you see that in order to be aligned with the blue curve that we need to target, then we have to inverse the trend, and the peak must not be after the 3 years from now. Okay, so you need really to make another direction very rapidly. So after this very anxious news, we worked on the solution. So the report is divided in very big numbers of chapters that are taking each sector and that are trying to bring solution for the different sectors. And I didn't say, as I talked about IT, but I didn't say what is the level of emission for the industrial sector. For the scope 1, means for the direct emissions, it's 22%. And if you add scope 2, the indirect emissions, it's 34%. So the problem with the industry is the fact that it's going to be the sector which will be the more difficult to mitigate because they will always remain a little part of the needs that are given by very carbon-related resources. So there is view of trying to develop specific technologies to capture these CO2 elements. But what the report says, and I didn't say that, but the report is not policy prescriptive, but it's policy relevant. That means that we are only bringing scientific facts without any recommendation. We just bring what the science knows. And what we know is that these technologies of capture, direct air capture, must be used at the very end, after all the efforts have been made in order to mitigate the emissions. Not at the beginning, saying we need to continue, we will continue to live as we had until now, and we're not going to change anything. So what was very interesting in this report is that for the first time, there was a chapter bringing what were the potential from the demand and services side, from the demand point of view. And the news are really interesting. We have assessed, and I was involved in the specific chapter on demand and services, that we can mitigate, the potential of mitigation is between 40 and 17%, which is huge. But this can be made at a lot of conditions, that the policies are here to accompany the change in the lifestyles, the infrastructures, and that there is also a very profound reflection of our norms, our values, and I think that the IT sector is really concerned with that, because despite the number of progress and promises that are brought by this sector, we see that there are more and more devices that rely on materials and also that are creating these greenhouse gases emissions. And that, I'm looking at the clock, it's finished, that we have an impact. So what I would like to say in conclusion, and I will show you this, then you can see that there is potential in different areas, that in this use of IT, in this search of real virtual world versus real world, we need to, and you need to really embed in your mind the potential carbon footprint that you have in every task and in every result and idea that you will develop. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Nadia. I think it's also very soothing and healing to have such a science, calm view on the situation. I think it gives me at least optimism. I would like to call again Bruno, because this is time for Q&A. And if you have one question, so we'll spend the next 10 minutes with our speakers. If you have one question, just raise your hand, and our hostesses will give you the microphone. And don't forget to introduce yourself so that everybody knows you. So any questions for Bruno or Nadia so far? Don't be shy. Bernard has one. And I have some as well.
Nadia, I don't need to be presented, I guess. But Nadia, thank you very much first, and thank you. It works?
Doesn't work.
Hello, hello.
C'est bon.
It worked. Thank you for this great presentation. Have you? Can you comment about the bill approach? The bill approach, the on-print, on-footprint, meaning creating certain efforts to improve, for example, in industries, on comparing what it takes to improve versus the savings you do. Do you have an approach which is really to have a bill between on-print and footprint?
Between footprint?
On print. We did a study, just to give a background for everyone, with Accenture. We evaluated the cost of production cars, the impact, the negative impact. And we evaluated it comparing, like in clinical trial, comparing a player not using traditional method versus a player using, let's say, simulation or modeling. And we evaluated that while the footprint to use the tools would be one, the handprint to save what could not be saved with mistakes was 10,000 in CO2 emission, which means that certain techniques could be preferred to others to improve the situation. Have you studied those kind of topics?
That's the key of the problem. It's a very difficult question because I think in each industrial sector you have specific processes and specific footprint. So, my only remark is that it's a very interesting approach because what is difficult in this subject is the fact that everyone has the right solution in his mind and doesn't assess the fact that might be a good solution in his point of view, but it might have a lot of rebound effects around, and specifically in the different manufacturing industrial sectors. I think it's very difficult just to assess scope 1, okay, scope 2, not bad, but scope 3, very, very difficult. So it relates to your tentative to have this evaluation, but I think it's the right way to do things in order to be efficient.
Any other question from the room? If not, I'll have some. Trying to bridge your two talks. Nadia and Bruno. Nadia, in the studies that you've been doing, have you looked deep, or let's say focusing on the materials that are consumed by industry, produced by industry? And do you see, since you are more in the solution space than just, declaring the status, do you see some innovation with new materials, with biochemistry, like what we saw in Bruno, that industry should look at as a transition towards the new objectives?
Yeah, I think there are bad news regarding the use of materials because of their criticality and the scarcity of these materials that are often used in new technologies and the one that were brought as solution for decarbonation. So we are now in a place where you have the physical limits of the planet regarding these materials, and you have the problem of greenhouse gases emissions, and both are showing us that maybe the work on the offer side will not be enough. This is why I wanted to insist on the question of demand. And when we talk about sustainability of industries, I think industrials must really embed in their strategic reflection today all this question, because for some of them, the core of their business is going to be questionable regarding all these limitations that they have to face.
Yeah. Still no one question. Bruno.
A question for Bruno Jarry, Académie des Technologies. You did not touch in your talk on one possible application of the work that you are doing, which is storage of information using DNA for numeric application. Could you comment a little bit on that?
Yes, I can. As a matter of fact, I might have been too quick, but I had one slide. My last slide was about that. And indeed, that's one of the interesting applications we are working on right now. So we have a program with the Broad Institute, with Harvard University, where we synthesize on CMOS support millions of DNA fragments, and we encode information on this DNA fragment. So there has been already some work being done where you can encode video in a piece of DNA, send a piece of DNA somewhere else, and decode DNA and see the video. So conceptually it works. Practical essay have been done. It works. Is that going to be the solution in the future? It's really a matter of industrialization, how much is going to cost, and so on. So we might think that it may work. We could already know today that it would be a better system as any other system which are available right now. But there are also other people thinking now about even further improvement using peptide or protein that could be used to encode information. So will DNA be the universal support in 50 years? I don't know. That would be good for our business, and we work for that.
One last question maybe for Bruno. There's one.
Hi, my name is Daniel. Oh God, that's loud. My question is for Nadia, it's not specifically for Bernard. You spoke about mitigating the... Sorry, I wrote the question. So you spoke about mitigating the emissions of using CO2 towards the end, using carbon capture. You spoke about mitigating the emissions of CO2 using carbon capture technologies towards the end, is there any scientific reasons why we can't start now and keep that going rather than starting it at the end?
Okay, these technologies are not mature right now. This is the main reason why they are not used. So there are prototypes, and there are some places where they are trying to test and to install them. But they're facing a lot of difficulties despite the technological aspect. There is also a social acceptance, which is very difficult to have. Today's the industrial projects are facing in all their all the sectors social acceptance problems, because before people were not regarding what was installed around their places, but now there are really big fights that are ongoing. So I think if you have these two elements, then you understand why the technologies are not developed and are not used. But also what we have seen is that in a lot of scenarios, you know, when you try to assess what kind of technologies can be used in order to mitigate, there were a long time ago scenarios where there was these technologies called TBD, which were to be defined. So that was meaning that the engineers will find a solution, there's no problem. And so this is why, as scientists, we are now regarding these very, with very lot of critiques in order to see if people were not too much optimistic while looking at these technologies. And we really think that we cannot rely only on technology, because the problem is much more important than trying to erase it with the vision of technology will provide. So I think that is what we have seen coming from all the publication and all the reports that we have analyzed, and also the fact that, yes, this technology will be mature in several decades, and we need to decrease our emissions now. So in order to reconcile that, we have to find other means of decreasing, of mitigating, before the technology will become mature.
Thank you, Nadia. Last question. I know we're over time, but I can't resist since we're transitioning to health, to Bruno. We're going to talk pharma, your DNA, so I can't resist. RNA printer. It's not CGTA, there's a new letter, but...
Ongoing.
Ongoing?
You know, on the same printer, which we try to make it very simple, like an espresso machine to make coffee.
What else?
If you want to change the test, you change the cartridge. So we have right now an RNA cartridge.
But there's only two flavors, DNA and RNA.
Well, you know, you have a lot of modification you can put on DNA part.
Thank you very much. Let's applaud our speakers. Thank you very much.